Hey guys, so today I want to show you how to set up a nice and simple object interaction system. Now I've just created a third-person template project, and the first thing that I want to do is I want to set up the PlayerCameraManager class. So if we go right click on the content browser, select blueprints, and we want to search for the player camera manager. Now I'm just going to call it BP player camera manager. Now the player camera manager manages the currently active camera that is being used to render the scene, and this gives us some really easy to use information. So in our world settings we don't have a game mode override, so I'm just going to create a game mode base, call it BP game mode, and we also want to create a player controller as well. I'm just going to call it player controller. Now the player camera manager class is instantiated by the player controller. So if we open up our player controller, you can see at the very top of the class defaults there is a player camera manager class, and we want to set that to our BP player camera manager. I'm going to compile and save that. Just quickly, on the drop down next to the compile button there is the save on compile option, and I'm just going to set that to always, so that every time that I press compile it's going to save it for me as well. Now I'm just going to set up our game mode override to use our player controller. In our player camera manager class I'm going to delete our default nodes, and I'm going to create a new variable, and I'm going to call it interaction trace distance. So we're going to use a line trace to query the scene in order to find any actors that intersect that line trace. So I'm just going to set that trace distance to a default value of 1000. And I'm going to create a new function, and I'm going to call this perform interaction trace. And this function is going to perform the bulk of our interaction functionality. So I'm going to create a new line trace by channel node, and again a line trace is going to be used to query the scene for any actors that intersect that line between the camera and our camera's position multiplied by the distance away from the camera. So our player camera manager class gives us two functions that we can use, our get camera location and get camera rotation functions. And we're going to use these two to drive our start and end points of the line trace. So we want to start at the camera's world location, and then we want to end at 1000 units beyond our camera's location in the direction that our camera is facing. So to get the direction that our camera is facing as a vector, we can use get forward vector. And this gives us a unit vector that is in the direction that our camera is rotated. So we want to multiply that unit vector by the distance that we want to end our line trace. And we want to convert that unit vector to the camera's world space location, and we do that just by simply adding these two vectors together. And that becomes our endpoint for our line trace. So we start at our camera location, we get our camera's rotation as a unit vector, we multiply that unit vector by our trace distance, and then we convert that unit vector into the camera's world space by adding it together. So I'm just going to set our draw debug type to for duration, which by default is 5 seconds. And in our event graph, I'm going to create a event tick node, and we're just going to simply perform our interaction trace every frame. So if we jump in game, you can see that our line trace is going from the camera's location 1,000 units in the direction that it is facing. Now it's a bit of a pain in the butt to have it pointing through the character, so I'm just going to quickly edit the third person character, and we want to grab the camera boom, and I'm going to set its location to 100 units and then change its target arm length to 600 so that our camera isn't so close and that we can more easily see where our line trace is pointing. You can see the little red boxes are telling us that our line trace hit an object, and if it didn't, there is no little red box. Now I kind of want to add a little crosshair, so I'm going to add a HUD class. I'm going to call that BP HUD, and in our game mode override that. Then in our HUD, I'm going to delete the default nodes, and I'm going to add a receive draw HUD event. I'm just going to simply drag off that, and we're just going to draw a simple rectangle. I'm just going to draw a white rectangle to represent our crosshair, and we want to draw this rectangle 2 by 2 pixels, and we want to draw it in the center of the screen. So we want to divide our screen X and Y by 2 to get the center of our screen, and we're just going to plug those into the screen X and Y. Divide by 2, screen X and Y. So that should give us a little white box in the center of our screen. And you can see that our line trace perfectly intersects with the center of our screen, because again we're taking the camera's forward vector, which is the direction that it's facing, and we're line tracing from its location 1,000 units in that direction. Alright, so back in our PlayerCameraManager, I'm just going to stop debugging our line trace. Now that we have a line trace, we can use the information that it returns to us about the scene to do some interesting stuff. So with our line traces hit result, I'm just going to promote that to a variable, and I'm going to call that interaction hit result, and I'm going to set that to be private, and then I'm going to split that result out to give all of the information. What we are more concerned with is the hit actor, and I'm also going to promote that to another variable, and it's going to be called interaction trace target actor. Oh, let's just call it interaction target actor. We don't really need trace, and it's going to be private as well. So we have two really good pieces of information, and because they're private, no other classes outside of the PlayerCameraManager can use these. So what we want to do is create two public-facing getter functions, and we're going to call that get interaction hit result, and I'm going to just drag off that and create a return node, and drag and drop our interaction hit result. And on the function, we can't forget to select the pure node. And again, for our get interaction target actor, pure, create a return node, grab our target actor, drag and drop. So setting these functions to pure means that we don't need an execution path in order to use them. So you can see that we both can query these two variables without an execution path. And any class that has access to the PlayerCameraManager can grab these two variables as well. So now that we have this information in the event graph, I'm going to just create a sequence node here, and we're going to print this information. Now, using print string with event tick, I'm going to set the duration to 0 so that we just take up one line instead of flooding the screen with a bunch of print string nodes. So I'm going to then append our string, and it's going to say current target :space, and we want to use our get interaction target actor function, which again returns our private variable here, and we want to make sure that it's valid, that it is a valid actor, and that our interaction trace isn't looking at nothing. And then we want to use a select node to grab our target actor's name, display name. So if this actor is valid, which is true, we want to use its display name. Otherwise, we just want to print none. So this is saying if we have no target actor, we just want to print none. But if we do have a target actor, we want to print its name. So if we compile that and then play, up the top left of our screen, you can see that our print string is saying that we have no target actor, because we're not looking at anything at the moment. That's within 1,000 units of the screen. But if we move close enough to another object, you can see that it's changed. The left arm static mesh is now within range to become our trace's target actor. So we've got a cube mesh here, we've got the floor, wall 10, a ramp static mesh, and left arm. And again, if we are pointing at nothing within 1,000 units of the camera, we have no target. So that's all great, but what if we want to actually do some interactions with some objects? Well, what we can do is we can use a blueprint interface. So I'm going to create a new blueprint interface, and I'm going to call it iInteractable. And inside this interface, we want to create a new function. I'm just going to call it interact, and I'm going to compile that. Now I'm also going to create a new blueprint actor, and I'm going to call it BP interactable object. And this object is going to implement that iInteractable interface. If we go to class settings, there is this category called interfaces, and we're just going to add our iInteractable interface and compile. Now if we search for our interact function, we get this event interact. We want to implement that. So when this function gets called, what do we want to do? I'm going to add a static mesh to this interactable object. I'm going to set it as the root, and let's just give it a static mesh of this cube. And I'm going to drag it into the graph. And what do we want to do? We want to set simulate physics. So when we interact with this cube, we're going to set it to simulate physics. But we don't have any way to interact with it just yet. So in our PlayerController class, I'm going to set a new left mouse button event, and we're going to access our PlayerCameraManager. We want to access it via the variable, not the function, because our function requires us to give it a player index. And because we're in the player controller, we already have direct access to our PlayerCameraManager. Now, the functions that give us the information about the interaction trace are not on our PlayerCameraManager object reference. They're on the BP PlayerCameraManager object reference. So we need to cast this to our BP PlayerCameraManager, which then gives us access to those functions. So we want to get interaction target actor. And then we want to just simply call the interact interface message. And this is an anonymous message, so if we have no target actor and this function is called, then it doesn't really matter, because if that interaction interface is not implemented, then it's not really going to matter. So if we compile that, and remember our interactable object is implementing that interface, and it's implementing that interact function. If we drag that into our scene and we play, you can see that when we move our crosshair onto our interactable object, our target has changed to interactable object. Otherwise it's something else. And then if I left click, it starts to simulate physics, because we sent it that event to be interact. And we can push it around. So we've set up a simple interaction with another object using an interface and our interaction trace. But what if we want this object to know that it is the target? Let's just set up a new function, and I'm going to call it actor is target, and I'm going to give it a Boolean parameter called b is target, and compile. So if we right click, we can search for our new actor is target in our interactable object, and you can see that our event actor is target is accessible here. So what do we want to do when we know that our object is the target of our interaction? I'm just going to give it a new text render component, and I'm going to set its text to say I am the target. And let's just set it to the center, and we kind of will need to move it up a little bit so that we can see it. And when our text render, when our object is the target, we want to set the text render's visibility to our isTarget parameter. Now we also need to make sure that our text render is not visible by default. So now, just like with our interact event, we have no way yet to tell this object that it is the target of our interaction trace. So if we go into our PlayerCameraManager and our perform interaction trace function, what we want to do is we're just going to move this out of the way, and I'm going to create a new branch here. And what this branch is going to do is it's going to tell us whether our target has changed. So we want to grab our actor that our line trace has detected, and we want to see if it is not equal to our interaction target actor that we saved in our variable. So if the actor that our line trace has picked up is different to the actor that we have saved in our variable, it is not equal, then that means that our target has actually changed. So because our target has changed, we can then call our actor is target on our, what is here at this point, our old target. We want to let our old target know that it is no longer the target, so we leave our isTarget parameter false. We set our new target, and then we want to let our new target know that it is now the target, and we set that to true. So we're using our line traces actor to detect whether it is the same or different to our currently saved actor. If it is different, then that means that our target has changed. We tell our old target actor that it is no longer the target. We set our variable to the new target, and we tell our new target that it is now the target. So if we come over to our interactable object and we make it our target, we can see that it is now the target. And if it is no longer the target, then our text render disappears again. And if we left click, we send it that interact event, and it starts to simulate physics. I turn that around, and let's just make a couple of them. So we can see that this one's the target, this one's the target, and these don't show anything because they're not implementing that interface, and they're not responding to any of those events. So it becomes quite simple to set up an interactable object. Let's just create a new actor. I'm going to call it BP interactable object 2. Let's just open it up. I'm going to give it a static mesh, and that's going to be the default root, and let's give it the stair static mesh. So I'm going to delete those default nodes. I'm going to go to class settings and add our interactable interface, compile, and then I'm going to add our interact event, and also our actor is target event. So what do we want to do? Let's, when we interact with it, let's set scale, set actor scale 3D. Let's set it to 2 times its own size when we interact with it. When it becomes our target, let's grab our static mesh, set material, and let us use the isTarget to select the material. So when it is not the target, let's set it to ramp material, and when it is the target, let's set it to the man body material. And let's also say when it's not the target, we want to reset its scale back to 0 in case it was changed when it was the target via interaction. So if we drag and drop that into the scene and we play, if we target it, our material changes, but when it isn't our target, the material changes back. And if it is our target and we interact with it, it changes scale. And if we stop targeting it, it changes back. So to summarize, what we've done is we've just created a simple line trace that we use to query the scene, to find actors that we are looking at. And then we use an interface to be able to call functions on the target that the camera is looking at in order to give them some unique functionality. And that's it, guys.